They parked their machines on my land like it was already theirs, and for a couple days, they honestly believed it was. The crazy part is, I didn't yell, I didn't call the cops, I didn't even tell them to leave right away. I just watched and let them dig their own hole, literally and legally. And by the time they realized what they'd done, it was already too late to fix it cheaply. It started on a Tuesday morning, one of those slow, quiet mornings where nothing feels like it's about to go wrong. I live just outside a small town in eastern Tennessee, not exactly rural, but not developed either, the kind of place where you still hear birds before traffic, and where people mind their business unless you give them a reason not to. My property sits behind a thin tree line, about 6 acres of open land that I've kept mostly untouched, not because I don't care about it, but because I do. It used to belong to my dad, and before that, my grandfather, and I guess I've always felt like I'm just holding on to it for the next person. Anyway, I was out walking my dog, Ranger, just letting him wander like he always does, nose to the ground, tail doing its own thing, when I heard it this low, heavy rumble that didn't belong out there. At first I figured it was coming from the highway about a mile out. Sound travels weird in the mornings, especially when the air's still. But then it got louder, and closer, and sharper, like metal hitting metal, engines idling too long. Ranger heard it too. He stopped, ears up, staring toward the far end of the field where the tree line breaks. That's when I felt it, that little shift in your gut that tells you something's off before your brain catches up. So I followed the sound. And then I saw them. 3 excavators, 2 dump trucks, all lined up on my land like they'd clocked in for work, and this was their assigned spot. Fresh tire tracks cut deep into the soil, darker patches where oil or hydraulic fluid had already started soaking in, and not a single sign that anyone thought this might be a problem. No cones, no warnings, no attempt to hide it. Just confidence. The kind of confidence that only comes from thinking no one's going to challenge you. I stood there longer than I probably should have, just taking it in. Across the tree line, maybe a few hundred yards out, there was a massive construction project going up, something that had been creeping closer over the past few months. Big retail development, grocery store, gym, a couple fast food chains, the whole deal. I'd seen the plans posted at City Hall a while back, knew it was coming, but I didn't think it had anything to do with me. Turns out, it did. Because from where I was standing, it didn't take much to connect the dots. Their site entrance was on the far side, which meant hauling equipment around a long gravel access road. Or cutting across my open land, parking closer, saving time, saving fuel, saving money. And I guess somewhere along the way, someone decided that was a good enough reason. I didn't confront anyone that morning. Not yet. I just turned around, called Ranger back, and walked home. Now, some people might say I should have marched right over there and raised hell, made a scene, threatened lawsuits. But I've learned over the years that the first reaction is usually the weakest one. Anyone can get loud. Not everyone can get strategic. So instead, I went inside, poured myself some coffee, and pulled out my property documents. The deed was exactly how I remembered it. Clean, straightforward, boundaries clearly defined, no easements, no shared access agreements, nothing that gave anyone the right to step foot on that land without my permission. I checked the survey from when I refinanced the house a few years back. Same thing, markers all in place, everything legally tight. There was no gray area, which meant what they were doing wasn't just inconsiderate, it was illegal. The next morning, I went back out there. Part of me expected it to be gone, like maybe it was a one-time thing, a mistake someone would correct once they realized. But no, not only was everything still there, it was worse. The machines weren't just parked anymore, they were being used. Workers were walking across my field like it was a public sidewalk, carrying tools, dragging cables, leaving behind water bottles, food wrappers, cigarette butts. One guy even nodded at me like we were neighbors sharing a driveway. That's when I decided it was time to introduce myself. I walked straight toward the edge of the site, where a guy in a hard hat and a bright orange vest was standing with a clipboard, talking into a radio. He looked like the kind of person who doesn't get surprised very often, the kind who assumes things will go his way unless proven otherwise. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. "Who authorized parking equipment on my property?" He looked at me, quick glance, then back to his clipboard like I'd just asked what time it was. "It's temporary," he said. Not even a pause. Not even a question about who I was. I took another step closer. "That's not what I asked. Who approved it?" He sighed, like I was slowing him down. Look, man, everyone uses this access. It's just easier. Everyone. That word stuck with me more than anything else. I nodded slowly. Not anymore. He finally looked up then, actually looked at me, like he was trying to decide if I was serious or just another guy talking tough for no reason. Then he shrugged. We'll move it later. Later. That word. I've heard it enough times to know what it really means. It means never, unless someone makes it happen. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten anything. I just turned around and started planning. Because if they thought my land was just a convenient shortcut, I was about to make it the most expensive mistake they'd made on that entire project. I didn't do anything dramatic that afternoon. No angry phone calls, no posts online, no showing up with a lawyer trying to scare anyone. I just sat at my kitchen table, looking out over that stretch of land, coffee going cold in my hand, and I started thinking about leverage, because that's really what this was about. They had size, money, momentum, but I had something they didn't, and that was control. Not emotional control, not moral high ground. Actual, legal, undeniable control over the ground their machines were sitting on. And once that clicked, everything got real simple. I made 3 calls. The first one was to a survey company out of Knoxville, a guy named Darren I'd worked with years back when we redid the boundary lines after a neighbor tried to push a fence a little too far over. Darren was the kind of guy who didn't rush, didn't guess, didn't leave room for interpretation. I told him I needed fresh markers, bright ones, visible from a distance, no confusion, no excuses. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just said, "Give me 2 days." The second call was to my insurance agent, Linda, and that conversation was a little more interesting. I explained the situation, told her there was heavy commercial equipment sitting on my property without permission, actively being used, and I wanted to make sure I was covered if something went wrong. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, real calm, "Do not touch anything. Do not give them permission. Document everything." I could hear her typing already. If there's an incident, it's on them, but we want to make sure you're protected from the fallout. That was all I needed to hear. The third call, that was the important one. I called a fencing contractor about an hour outside town, a crew I'd seen working on a ranch a while back. Heavy steel panels, not the cheap stuff, not decorative, functional, solid, the kind of fence you don't just move because it's inconvenient. The owner, Miguel, answered, and I told him exactly what I needed, not around the entire property, not yet, just a specific stretch, right where the access point was being used. There was a pause, then he chuckled a little. "Sounds like you've got a situation." "Something like that," I said. "You trying to keep people out, or keep something in?" I looked out the window again, toward the machines sitting there like they belonged. "A little bit of both." He said he could have a crew out by Friday morning. Perfect. Now here's the thing. None of this was about revenge. At least, that's what I told myself at the time. It was about boundaries. About the idea that if you let something slide once, especially something this blatant, it doesn't just stop, it becomes the new normal. And I wasn't about to let my land turn into a permanent shortcut just because it made someone else's job easier. Thursday came, and Darren showed up right on time. No rush, no shortcuts, just methodical, precise work. He walked the perimeter, checked the old markers, confirmed everything, and then started placing new stakes, bright orange caps, spaced clearly, running the full line where my property met that construction site. By the time he was done, you could stand 50 yards away and still see exactly where my land began. There was no way anyone could claim they didn't know. I noticed a few of the workers watching him from across the line, quiet, curious, maybe a little uneasy. One of them even walked over and asked what was going on. Darren didn't look up, just said, "Property line verification." That was enough. Friday morning, that's when things shifted. I woke up early, earlier than usual, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see it happen. There's something about knowing a plan is about to come together that just doesn't let you sleep in. I made coffee, stepped outside, and right on schedule, I saw Miguel's trucks pulling up, flatbeds loaded with steel panels, posts, equipment. No hesitation. They got to work immediately. No big announcements, no discussions with the construction crew, just action. Post holes, anchors, panels going up one after another, forming a straight, unbroken line right across the exact path those machines had been using. And not just any fence, 8 feet tall, solid steel, with a locked gate positioned in a very specific spot. right in front of the parked equipment. I stayed back for most of it, just watching from a distance, letting it unfold. A few workers from the construction site wandered closer as the fence started taking shape. You could see the confusion on their faces, the slow realization creeping in. One of them pulled out his phone, probably calling his supervisor. By mid-morning, the line was complete. By noon, the situation had fully sunk in. Because here's what they hadn't considered: it's one thing to drive equipment onto someone's land when it's open. It's another thing entirely when that access disappears overnight. The excavators were now sitting behind a locked barrier. The dump trucks had no clear path out. And because of how the fence was positioned, the only way to move anything was to cross my property, which they no longer had permission to do. I was standing near the edge of the fence when the first call came in. Unknown number. I answered anyway. "This is Caleb from the site." The voice said, tight, controlled, but you could hear the frustration underneath. "You need to open that gate." I leaned against one of the steel panels, looking at the machines on the other side. "I don't need to do anything." There was a short silence, then, "You can't block access like this. That equipment needs to move." I let that hang for a second. "You mean the equipment that's parked on my property without permission?" Another pause, longer this time. "This is going to cost us a lot of money." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Sounds expensive." That's when the tone shifted, just a little. "Look," he said, "we can work something out." We were going to move it anyway. "Later," I said. He didn't respond to that. "We'll compensate you," he added quickly, like he thought that was the key. I pushed off the fence, took a few steps along the line, running my hand across the cold steel. "It's too late for that." And then I hung up. About an hour later, my phone rang again, different number this time. "Mr. Carter," a new voice said, calmer, measured, professional. "This is Daniel Reeves, project manager for the Ridgeway development." I didn't say anything right away. Just let him continue. "I understand there's been a situation regarding equipment on your property." That's one way to put it. "I want to start by apologizing," he said, and this time it sounded genuine, or at least practiced well enough to pass. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about land use in that area." I looked out at the field again, at the stakes, the fence, the machines sitting still for the first time since I'd seen them. "That's not really how ownership works," I said. He exhaled softly. "Understood. We'd like to resolve this as quickly as possible." There it was. Not denial. Not excuses. Resolution. Which meant they finally understood the position they were in. And more importantly, the position I was in. He asked me what it would take to fix the situation. And for the first time since this started, I smiled. Because now we weren't talking about permission anymore. We were talking about terms. I didn't answer him right away, not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I wanted him to sit in that silence for a second, feel it, understand that this wasn't going to be one of those quick, name your price, and we'll Venmo it kind of fixes. This had already gone past inconvenience. This was liability, damage, and a whole lot of assumption on their part that nobody had challenged until now. So I walked a few steps along the fence, gravel crunching under my boots, eyes on those machines sitting dead still behind steel they hadn't planned for, and I said, "Here's what it takes." I kept my voice even. No anger, no edge, just clear. "First, every piece of equipment comes off my land immediately, and that's on your dime, not mine, not shared yours. However you have to do it, cranes, rerouting, whatever it costs, that's not my problem." He didn't interrupt. "Second, the land gets restored properly, not just smoothed over so it looks good from a distance. I want the compacted soil broken up, regraded, treated if there's contamination, oil, hydraulic fluid, anything that seeped in. I want it tested and fixed, documented, still quiet. Third, I want a written agreement, signed, stating your company, your contractors, and anyone associated with that project will never use my land for access again. Ever." I paused there, let that one sit. "And fourth, compensation for unauthorized commercial use of private property." That's when he finally spoke again, careful now. "Do you have a number in mind?" I did. I gave it to him. There was a short laugh on the other end. Not loud, not mocking exactly. More like reflex, like his brain needed a second to process what he'd just heard. "That's higher than we expected." "I'm sure it is." Another pause. Then he said, "I'll need to run this by legal." "Of course you will." We hung up after that. No drama, no threats, Just two people who both understood that the next move wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about risk. The rest of that day was quiet, but not really. You could feel the tension sitting out there like humidity before a storm. Workers kept their distance from the fence. Conversations got shorter, more contained. A couple of trucks came and went on their side, but nothing crossed that line. By late afternoon, I saw a black SUV pull up near the site office, not the kind of vehicle you see hauling tools. A man in a suit stepped out, briefcase, phone already in his hand. He didn't look around much, just went straight inside. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't laughing anymore. Saturday passed without much change, which, honestly, was exactly what I expected. These things don't resolve overnight, especially when lawyers get involved. But by Sunday evening, I got the call. Different voice again. This time, it was their attorney. He introduced himself, polite, direct, no wasted words. And within the first couple minutes, it was clear he wasn't calling to argue. He was calling to confirm. He walked through the situation point by point. Unauthorized use, potential environmental impact, equipment immobilized on private property, exposure to liability if anything happened while those machines were sitting there. Even mentioned something I hadn't fully considered, which was the potential for trespass damages stacking over time. At one point, he paused and said, almost casually, from a legal standpoint, "You're well within your rights here." Hearing it out loud like that, from their side, that was different. Not satisfying exactly, just clarifying. He didn't push back on the terms. Not really. He asked a couple of questions about the restoration requirements, wanted specifics on testing and documentation, but the structure of it, the core of it, he didn't challenge. Which meant one thing. They had already done the math, and the math didn't favor them. By Monday morning, we had a draft agreement in my inbox. I read through it slowly, line by line, coffee in hand. Ranger stretched out on the floor like none of this had anything to do with him. Most of it was what we discussed: removal, restoration, access restrictions, all there. The compensation number was there too, unchanged. That part surprised me a little. Not because I thought they'd refuse, but because they didn't even try to negotiate it down, which told me I probably could have asked for more. But at that point, it wasn't about squeezing every dollar out of it. It was about setting a boundary and having it respected. I sent it over to my own attorney, a guy named Bill who'd handled some estate stuff for my family years back. He made a few adjustments, tightened up the language around liability and timelines, added a clause about penalties if restoration didn't meet agreed standards. By noon it was signed. Just like that. No courtroom, no shouting, no drawn-out fight. Just pressure applied in the right place, at the right time. Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sound of engines again, but this time, it was different. Controlled, deliberate, coordinated. I stepped outside and saw cranes positioned along the edge of the site, crews moving with purpose. They weren't cutting corners anymore. They were solving a problem. Their problem. One by one, the machines came out, lifted, repositioned, routed the long way around like they should have been from the start. It took hours, maybe cost them more than they'd ever admit, but by late afternoon, my land was empty. Well, almost. Because the damage was still there. The tracks, the compacted soil, the dark stains where fluid had soaked in, it didn't just disappear because the machines were gone. But to their credit, they followed through. Over the next couple weeks, crews came back, different crews this time. Environmental specialists, soil technicians, equipment I hadn't seen before. They tested everything, documented everything, broke up the ground, regraded it, treated the contaminated areas, and slowly, piece by piece, it started to look like mine again. Not perfect, maybe it never would be exactly what it was before, but close enough that you had to know where to look to see what had happened. And then, just like that, it was quiet again. No engines, no shortcuts, no assumptions, just wind moving through the grass, and Ranger chasing nothing in particular like he always does. Now here's the part people keep asking me about, whether I feel bad about how it played out. And the honest answer is, I don't know. Because on one hand, yeah, it probably cost them a lot. Time, money, stress, all of it. And maybe someone on that site genuinely thought the land was unused, that no one would care, that it was just an empty stretch of dirt between point A and point B. But on the other hand, they didn't ask. They didn't check. They didn't think that maybe the reason it looked untouched was because someone chose to keep it that way. And that's the part that sticks with me. Because it wasn't really about the machines, or the fence, or even the money. It was about that moment when someone decides convenience matters more than ownership, more than respect, more than the idea that just because something isn't actively defended doesn't mean it's up for grabs. So yeah, I built a fence, but not just out there in the field. I built one in their expectations, and I made sure they couldn't walk through it again. Now I'm curious what you think. Was that fair, or did I take it too far? Would you have handled it differently? Maybe given them a warning, worked something out before locking things down? Or do you think some lessons only stick when they come with a price tag? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever dealt with something like this, neighbors, contractors, anyone crossing a line they shouldn't, I'd really like to hear how it played out for you.